I think one of the key things is really understanding that this is a very frustrating but very normal process. The symptoms evolve and change over what can be quite a long period of time, and therefore we have different needs, and we need the knowledge and skills from different types of health practitioners, I think, ideally, in order to provide a holistic approach to these years and this transition.
Welcome to Midlife Unfiltered, a podcast about unapologetically embracing the season of me as we live the lives we want in midlife and beyond. I'm Anita McLachlan.
I'm Erica Webb. We're here to make some noise, say hell no to outdated stereotypes, and hell yes to living life on our terms. Hey Anita, how are you?
Erica, I am mighty fine. How are you doing?
I am great, and I am really looking forward to this conversation. So excited to introduce Kirstin. So shall I just go ahead and do that now?
Please do. I'm excited too. So let's pop the cork and get going.
Yes. So we are really excited. We literally did like a little giddy happy dance when Kirstin said yes to our invitation to be on the podcast. That was how much we were hoping. We had our fingers crossed. We're like, please say yes. But Kirstin Bouse is here to join us to talk about the myths and emotions of menopause. And we're going to be talking about this from the perspective of Kirstin being a psychologist. So Kirstin's been a clinical psychologist for a long while. And my understanding, Kirstin, you can kind of jump in after I finish and correct me if I get any of this wrong, but my understanding is that it was your own perimenopause experience that kind of led you into this world. My understanding is that you might actually be a forensic psychologist. And Kirstin founded an organization, a center called All About Her, which is a center for menopause, supporting women with resources and knowledge to navigate the menopause transition, which is incredible, which is why we were just so excited to speak to you. So welcome, Kirstin. We would love for you to just add anything to that intro that feels important, pertinent, or just that you would like to share.
Sure. Wow, you're very, very kind. And maybe be careful what you wish for, because I do like to talk, and I have been known to get on the soapbox. So
We love that.
I'll try to keep the talking within reason, and the soapbox maybe not so much. But yeah, no, you got it right. I am a clinical and forensic psychologist, and I've clocked up about 28 years now in my profession. The first half was definitely in the forensic area, which a lot of people don't know what that means. So yes, it does mean I spent quite some time working in maximum security prisons here in Perth. And it also involves a lot of child protection and family court work as well, which I don't do that work anymore, but I do still support, psychologists who are moving into those spaces for supervision and training and things like that. I really enjoy that because I still get to use that side of my brain, but not having to do the actual work. It's a bit cheeky, really. And it's freed me up as well to then be able to pursue my passion. And I guess over the second half of my career, it's been very much about supporting women, working with women, and through quite significant transitions. So perinatal work was a lot of work that I've also spent a lot of time in that space. And interestingly, having moved into the perimenopause space as well, there's kind of so many similarities, not just on kind of the hormonal level. Obviously, there's a lot going on hormonally in those two life experiences, but also psychologically as well. And for me, it's a really exciting space to work because there's a significant period of challenge, I think, that comes with both an adjustment, but with that comes a lot of growth. And that's, the part that's really, really rewarding for me to kind of work in and work with women who are experiencing that. And in terms of All About Her, we only launched in March. I do have a group psychology practice here in Perth. I've had that for about 18 years. But All About Her is definitely very new, and without a doubt, it was born out of my own frustrations with my own experience, both in terms of my direct experience of perimenopause and trying to find the right health providers to support me, as well as then, trying to connect clients to health providers, in different disciplines where they can also get support, and colleagues and friends. Like I'm a pretty persistent person, and it was really, really difficult for me to find, the naturopath, the osteopath, the physio, all those different kind of nutritionists, all those different allied health professionals that can support women as they're navigating these years. Because what I learned personally, and certainly sitting in front of lots of women and listening to their stories, is that the symptoms evolve and change over what can be quite a long period of time. And therefore, we have different needs, and we need the knowledge and skills from different types of health practitioners, I think, ideally, in order to provide a holistic approach to these years and this transition. So, yeah, definitely born out of my own frustrations for myself and for others.
Yeah, that's fantastic. We're certainly hearing that in the conversations we're having with women as well, particularly some frustrations around I'm treated as a body part, like lots of body parts, and I'm not getting the whole solution that I need.
Yeah.
No, they're not listening to me. I'm in there for 10 minutes and then they tell me, here's a prescription, try that, or go to this website, click on that and come back and see me in 2 weeks. So we're discovering that there's a lot of gaps in the information and the solutions and the advice and support for women. So we absolutely love what you're about and what you're doing with All About Her, because those gaps just need to be filled. And that's why we're here as well. We want to help women be their own advocates and with that, bridge those gaps. And I think a big gap in all of that is understanding our minds in this whole transition, because you say the words menopause and straight away we go to ovaries and reproductive hormones. But for some reason, and this is another gap Erica and I want to fill too, is that we dislocate our heads from the rest of our body. We dislocate our brains and our minds from the rest of us, and we want to encourage people to think of them as one and the same. We're all it's all part of one body. But we don't often talk about the changes that are happening in our brains, and then how that influences how we feel and on an emotional level. So is that a good place to open the conversation, to say that let's go there?
I think so, because that's my it's my happy place to be talking about this stuff, because I agree it is really, really overlooked. And I'm going to refer to the perinatal period. So we all have this recognition that pregnancy and childbirth is obviously a very biological experience, and hormones are having a big role in that. But there's a word that many people don't know about that applies to the psychological process of pregnancy and becoming a mother, and it's particularly a mother. And that word is matrescence. And it's a word that when you work with women as psychologists or therapists, and you're in the perinatal space, you'll know this word. It captures only the psychological transformation that occurs. It's a really powerful word. So we have a special word to describe the psychology of becoming a mother, and we don't have that in menopause. And I wish somebody would kind of create it. Well, actually, there is a woman, Jane Hardwick Collins. You probably have heard of her. She talks about sage essence. And it's that kind of movement and development and growth and evolution towards a wise woman. And, I think that's whatever word we use, we definitely need to acknowledge that there is a very deep internal shift that occurs during this particular stage. And it is instigated, sure, by the neuroendocrine kind of event that is perimenopause, just like it's instigated by the neuroendocrine event that is pregnancy. And, uh, so we can't ignore the hormones. I don't want to ignore the hormones, but it's bigger than just hormones.
Yeah, bigger than just the
and
hormones. Yeah.
that's not often talked about. Having said that, we also haven't talked about menopause generally until quite recently. And so a lot of conversation is starting to happen, which is wonderful. And I'm hoping in time that the psychology of menopause, which is kind of how I refer to it, becomes part and parcel of that conversation. Because it's also, the psychology of menopause is also a little bit separate to mental health in menopause. And again, people often think that they're one and the same thing. We need a heck of a lot more research in this area. If anyone wants to give me a scholarship to do my PhD, I'm totally up for it. I did really explore whether I could do it, but financially I just can't.
Well, we'll put it out to the universe and we'll see
Put it
what
out
comes
to
back.
out to the universe.
That's it.
And I'm getting to be involved in some cool research in supporting other people, which is kind of really great as well. But this is definitely an area that my own profession hasn't done enough in, and that's really, really disappointing. But it also just reflects the general approach to women's health, women's psychology. I mean, psychology is founded in a lot of men's, early men who have been prominent in the area with their theories. And, most reference points have also, like all other health stuff, have been males as well. So, yeah, we're new to this focus of women and women's mental health and women's psychology, and it's long overdue. Hopefully that's my rant over.
No, I hope it's not. I hope it's
keep
not.
going.
I think we need more.
Bring it on.
I actually would love you to just pick that apart a little bit more, the difference between the psychology of menopause versus mental health in menopause. So I'm curious if you could just tell us how they're different. I think that would be a really important place to go.
Well, I guess the psychology of a person, if we kind of look more broadly, really refers to the parts of us that make us who we are. So the things like our identity, they're our values, they're our beliefs, they're the way that we relate and engage with ourselves and with others. Like there's a whole spectrum of different things, temperament, personality, all of that stuff would come into the psychology of a human, and therefore you can kind of narrow it to the psychology of a particular person. If you want to make sense of who someone is, then you're kind of looking at all those different aspects and more, but that's just some of them. And that exists, in and of itself. You don't have to have a mental health issue to have the psychology of who you are. And I think that is the distinction. I mean, I guess we can look at mental health from good mental health to not so good and very poor mental health. So there's that spectrum. But sitting underneath that is always the person as well, and the psychology of the person. And we often talk about, and most people would know this, that we talk about developmental stages in human development across their lifespan. And of course, we've got a lot of the physical kind of stuff. So, babies roll over, sit up, crawl, all of those other physical kind of capacities. Alongside that, our cognitive capacities also grow and develop as well. And then there's the psychology that happens. And what's really fascinating to me, because I'm kind of pulling related areas of psychology into trying to make sense of the psychology of menopause, because I know there's a book coming out later this year that's written by a counselling psych, and I'm dead keen to actually read it because it's the first thing I've been able to find that refers to the psychology of menopause. But, essentially, I guess what we're really looking at is developmental milestones. So when we think of perhaps adolescence, and, this is quite interesting parallels here. When we think of adolescence, we know that there's a lot of hormonal stuff going on. And funnily enough, this stage of life, perimenopause, menopause, has often been referred to as reverse puberty. And that reference is really very confined. I mean, it's very relevant, but confined to the hormonal kind of picture of it. Interestingly, the psychological milestones that adolescents kind of wrestle with, this is what we would say is normal for adolescents to wrestle with, are things like their identity, their belief systems. They strive for independence and autonomy. They want an identity separate to their parents. They, what we call, individuate. So they start to separate from their parents and they start to be, kind of people in and out. I mean, we're all people from the get-go, but even more so in adolescence. They renegotiate their relationship with their bodies because there's so much going on. That can take quite some time as well. And these are all the things that when we look at some of the qualitative research that's been done on menopausal, like midlife and menopausal women, we see that those are the same things that most are actually grappling with. So for me, as I said, there's an absence of literature in this very specific area, in the sense of saying that, okay, if these are the common things that women grapple with in, their midlife years, would we say that that's a normal developmental task of midlife, is to re-wrestle with these things? We can't draw that conclusion yet. There's no research drawing that conclusion, but there's definitely research that says these are the common psychological themes that we wrestle with internally within us. And so, again, I hear that in the therapy room all the time. And in conversations, anyone who wants to strike up a conversation with me about their experience of these years will definitely talk about shifts in their identity. They'll talk about shifts in their priorities and their values, their belief systems. They often, again, it's very much linked to identity, but they have this very strong desire to reconnect with who they are, separate to the roles they play with other people. Because a lot of our identity is tied up in our relationships with other wife or partner, mother, sister, daughter. Like, they're all about, and they're very important, but they're all determined by our relationship with somebody else. And this is a time where I see this individuation process that we see in adolescence. It happens in a slightly different way, but it's still about, I want to just be me, independent of those other people, and I want to nourish that part of me. So that's what I'd call the psychology of menopause versus mental health, where you're actually talking about mood and anxiety and trauma re-emerging, those kinds of things. Now, sometimes the grappling with the psychology of yourself during these years can be so challenging, as well as all the other stuff that's going on in midlife, as well as all the hormonal stuff and the symptoms that you're dealing with. Sometimes that does create mental health issues, so they can coexist, but they're still two separate beasts, if that makes sense.
Thank you for that distinction, because that's super helpful. Yeah, really good.
Good.
Things around, I'm so excited. Anita's face is very excited. I know she's got something to say.
I'm about to say, these notes that we've made, we're going to chuck them out the window.
Chuck them out the window.
I'm about to say.
But they're great notes.
I think every word that I was hanging on every word, because in my mind I've got a series of boxes and I'm just ticking them all off. I'm going, yeah, everything you've said holds so true. Yeah. And it's so, why the fuck don't we know more about this? Like, seriously, this makes my blood boil, and maybe that's my, postmenopausal response to things. But I love the fact that you're onto this, because and we will support you all the way as much as we can to have these conversations around, even if it's the simpler, if you want to simplify it or call it a simplification, but relating it to adolescence, that just makes it so much more tangible and understandable. It's like, I get that, because
Yeah.
my teenage kids, I've lived through that with them. Even if I've forgotten what it meant for me, I've
Yeah.
certainly lived through it with them. So
Yeah.
thank you for that. That was really
You're
enlightening for
welcome.
me. Yeah,
Mm.
I think
And
that's great.
I think the additional thing is, and this is definitely not kind of confirmed it by research or anything, but we talk about the developmental milestones, which I mentioned before, of adolescence. And so I guess the thinking behind that is it's a normal process. It's a difficult process and it's a normal process. And when young people can navigate that properly, then they are going to be more likely to, I guess, have good mental health and be able to navigate the next stage, which is young adulthood and things. So there's this sense of if you can't navigate a developmental stage and the psychological kind of components of it well, then it doesn't, kind of impedes your movement towards the next step. And that's why when stuff happens at different points, particularly in those really formative years, early childhood and adolescence, when really tough stuff happens at those stages, we take a detour. Often young kids and young people aren't able to meet their developmental milestones because the shit's hit the fan, to be blunt, and it can take quite some time for them to be able to come back and be able to eventually meet that developmental milestone and truly move forward. And so whether or not that bit's true for menopause, as in what does a normal, not so much normal, but what does it look like when somebody navigates these
That
well?
life stage.
And
Yeah.
what does it not look like? What does it look like when they haven't navigated it well? And that's also what I'm really curious about, because there's great narratives around women in postmenopause, and they will say these are the best years of my life. I feel most myself. I feel, really confident in who I am, very accepting of who I am. And the way my mind goes is, how did they get to that? And for those who can't say that, what's not happened for them? And it may well be, I guess I also have the opinion that navigating menopause is tricky, and the more privileged you are, the more likely you're going to be able to navigate that effectively. So if you are in scenarios where you can't afford to reduce work hours, stop work, afford your medication, see the right doctor, do all the things, then that you're going to be in survival mode, and these other psychological tasks are just too airy fairy. So that I really need to state that as well, that privilege comes into any developmental stage and how we navigate them, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
What's popping up for me, Kirstin, is I kind of highlighted a few things on my piece of paper, and one of the things Anita and I were talking about before you jumped on was this question of, like, am I going crazy in midlife? And when you're talking about that, I remember having the same feeling when I was a teenager, just thinking, like, there's something wrong with me. Am I going crazy? Does anyone else feel like this? So I wonder if you tie that in for us, this sense of, like, one of the things that Anita's talked about on the podcast before is, like, the rage that came with the menopause transition. And, those Anita's face, she's like, oh, yes, I did.
I threw a knife. Yeah.
She threw a knife.
That's
Yeah,
my
she
shame
told that
story.
story.
Yes, I heard.
Yeah.
Mm.
Oh, you heard?
Oh,
It's doing the rounds,
it's
Anita.
gone viral, has it?
I've got a really good one too. It's about the skip bin guy.
Oh, right.
The skip bin
Is he
guy.
in the skip bin?
Somebody had the nerve to fill my skip bin with their stuff before I had finished filling it. It was
And
my
they heard
finest
about it.
hour.
Yeah.
They heard about it, as
You
did my neighbours,
them
and
down.
I ran into the street and said some very loud words, profane words with gestures, and my kids were just looking at me like, "What has happened to you?
What have you done with my mother?"
I'm known to swear a lot, but this was rage. This was
Yeah.
this was absolute absolute rage as this person drove off after filling my skip bin with their
Oh, they
stuff.
had the nerve to bring their car, did they? Wow.
Yeah. I just didn't get there out quickly enough to stop them. They were already in their car heading off. So
That's
yes,
awesome.
I know that when in the perinatal space again, it was kind of called mother rage, and I've heard a phrase meno rage now going around. Yeah, crazy for sure. I think so much is so much is going on for us during this stage of life. So, let's just also acknowledge there's a lot going on externally, and by that I mean, we've got careers, we've got financial stuff, we've got a lot of us have children who are teenagers, young adults, ATAR, uni, work, all of that jazz, driving lessons, blah, blah, blah. Elderly parents or parents who are passing away. Like there's a lot going on in our external environment that we're needing to, it's just no avoiding it. These things happen and we need to find a way to respond. But internally there's all of the shifts as well. And so though, some people have loads of symptoms, others not so many, but either way, there's this, it's a very tumultuous time, I think. And we're actually not quite who we were. And I think this is where the crazy comes into play, because we're not this capable, excellent juggler of things, can be diplomatic when required, but also, I certainly know none of us were perfect before this stage, but I think our bandwidth was a lot greater. And then we're in this transition period for a really long time. It's not like, I guess, a couple of months of upheaval and we're not who we were, but yeah, now we're who we're going to become. We're there. We've arrived at this new kind of wiser, more measured person who feels life to the fullest and is self-assured. It's a process. And if we look at any kind of change theory around when it's talking about change in people, there's a period of transition, and that is always the hardest, because as I said, we're on a very unstable platform, and none of us like to feel like that. None of us like to lose the anchor that we've had, and the anchor that we've typically had, and sometimes it's not even fully conscious, but we've got a perception of ourselves, of who we are and how we are in the world. And that's the bit that changes. So we feel at sea. So it's not just all these things outside of ourselves. It's I actually feel different, and I can't place why, but I can tell you that my behavior is changing because I am losing my shit more often, and I'm feeling overwhelmed about things that I haven't felt overwhelmed, about before. I can't cope. I can't juggle. I forget things. I can't think clearly. I'm up and down, and that impacts my relationships and my capacity to work. I know for me, the brain fog was really confronting because I relied so heavily on my brain in my job. And, all of those things that it's often when we lose those that we actually realize how much importance we place on those and how much they are part of our identity. And so it's not an identity you want when all those things, it's not pleasant. You don't want to be in a permanent state of confusion, overwhelm, irritability, brain fog, memory loss, all of those kinds of things. And yet we stay in that space up and down and up and down. It's not all bad every single day, every moment, but it's a very variable thing. And I think that is the actual icing on the cake, is the unpredictability that we experience within ourselves, because life is unpredictable. But by the time we are in our kind of 30s and things, who we are and how we respond to things is pretty predictable. And this is the stage where we're not predictable, because one day we might actually have it together and be okay, because for whatever reason our hormones are playing nice. And then in the afternoon or the next day, we are not the person that we want to be.
And I guess
and we
that's
can't
tied in with
anticipate it.
cycles. I guess that's tied in
Yeah.
with cycles too,
Yeah.
isn't it, Kirsten? Like
Absolutely.
the predictability of a cycle, if for
Mm-hmm.
most women is there. So that's,
Mm.
that's
Yeah.
taken out as well. So what
Yeah.
do we do? Like this, I'm assuming that the things you've just talked about there,
Mm.
like the brain fog and the unpredictability
Mm.
and the upheaval that we all feel within. Um, what do we do about that as women? Like, do we spoke recently with Angela, who said, awareness is a big thing. So take
Mm.
some notes on how you feel inside and the changes that you're experiencing. Start
Mm.
putting that down. Have you got some clues as to how we can begin to navigate this with a bit more confidence?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think all those real basics are very, very important. So this is a time where we need to start really looking at, I mean, ideally we've been doing that for a while, but we really need to start looking after ourselves. I think one of the biggest struggles that we have is that what would be best for us is often we're not able to put into practice. So, wouldn't it be lovely if we could go to work on the days where we really felt capable, but not go to work on the days when we didn't? And, that some of us who work for ourselves might have a bit more flexibility in that. But it's still only to a point. But in terms of so sleeping, exercising, all of those, trying to reduce your stress, all of those basics. I don't mean to sound flippant because they're super, super important. But I also know how difficult that they can be to kind of implement in life. I think one of the key things is a really understanding that this is a very frustrating but very normal process. Because when those thoughts of I'm going crazy, I'm not myself, I just spewed at the skip bin guy and my kids saw it. Is this who I'm going to stay forever?
Yeah. Is this me
Um,
forever? Yeah.
yeah, I think it's both a blessing and a curse that it's not who we're going to be forever. I mean, we would rather kind of be far more steady for sure. But when we're in those moments where we're not coping, overwhelmed, blah, 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 all of that stuff, it's a very important thing to remind us that this is actually the process of growth. Growth doesn't tend to occur when life is going well. It just doesn't. It's not how we're built. As humans, the human condition is growth does get born out of struggle. What we want is for the struggle to not be so great that it permanently overwhelms us, which is when mental health issues can kick in for sure. So normalizing the experience, setting boundaries is probably the biggest thing, but the hardest thing because it's hard for women to prioritize themselves typically, let alone when there's subtle pushbacks from family members, which is often really common. And I refer to Brene Brown's statement where she said, the people who get most kind of upset about you setting boundaries are the ones who benefited from you not setting boundaries. And I think that's really, really true. But there's a lot of stuff that which we as psychologists called schemas. There's a lot of schemas that sit under these patterns of living that we have and patterns of relating to others that we have, and boundaries or not setting them or not setting them in certain areas of our life or with certain people is one that is loaded with schemas which can be unpacked in a kind of therapeutic setting. And the interesting thing is this is one of the times where we often see, as I said, the most struggle, but also the most rapid growth. It's like we're primed for it. And that's because from a neuroscience perspective, and this is what I've learned from my neuroscience colleague, who's all over this stuff, is our brains are most kind of neuroplastic at these very important hormonal times: puberty, pregnancy, postpartum, perimenopause. So it creates a lot of vulnerability, but it also creates a lot of opportunity. And it's when we can actually make the most changes to our neurocircuitry with the right support, with awareness, as your other kind of guest said. So I think there's lots that we can do. What I often hear from women is that they know it's almost like they know what they should be doing in different areas of their life. It's their schemas that really hold them back. And then for those who are kind of courageous enough to try and make some changes, then sometimes it's the system that pushes back. And when I say the system, I'm talking partners, kids, stuff like that. And so you've got to have a cheerleader, I think, as well, to be able to follow through and make the changes that you want to make. And sadly, some women it just doesn't happen for them. And often they're the women that end relationships because their partner's not coming on board. Sometimes, they're the ones that end up in couples counselling, which is great because then there's some really beautiful outcomes where there's opportunities for growth for both people in the relationship. I know as a mum, probably some of the hardest stuff is changing the expectations, because sometimes it's just bloody easier to do it myself than to keep harping on at the kids or that kind of stuff. So you can't change everything all at once because it is hard work. It's about working out how you want to be different and what's most important in what is probably a reasonable list of how you want to be different, and trying to focus on that. And I think the final thing I would certainly say we need is absolute bucket loads of self-compassion, because it is a really, really tough path, just whether you're trying to make changes or not, just living with what's going on. A lot of it is so internal, so it's not always visible to people, outside. I mean, how many women I have a hot flush and nobody can tell except for the fact that I'm stripping off, and but I don't necessarily look like it. And that's just one symptom. There's all these other symptoms that don't look visible to others. And so, we just need a lot of self-compassion when we're navigating all the symptoms, all the life expectations and role demands, and also when we're grappling with the psychology of ourselves, because it's shifting. They would be kind of, I think, the ingredients. And sometimes people need to have self-compassion modeled by others, and also compassion from others to start to be able to internalize it themselves. And again, that's sometimes the role that a therapist can play, is to really help build someone's self-compassion.
Yeah, to feel that they're worthy of that, of receiving that. I feel that's another big one that we often hear is, I don't feel like I'm enough and I'm not worthy of receiving your compassion, and your guidance. So, they're great. Erica, something else that we were keen to talk to Kirstin about is if we can switch gears to the mental health implications of the menopause transition, something that has come up for me time and time again, and I'm a big fan of Luann Bryzantine. I never know how to pronounce it.
The Upgrade.
The Upgrade. That book changed my life. Got Erica onto that book because Erica's 41, right? So she's coming into Perryland. I'm out the other side. I'm postland.
Yes, me too.
But I love that, and Lisa Mosconi's work as well. But the fact that she said in clinic that a lot of women are misdiagnosed from a mental health point of view, and that she would often prescribe hormones, for example, instead of, an antidepressant or something like that. So for me, there's the misdiagnosis, why is that happening, and the misunderstanding. And then also the statistics about, really, a little bit frightening, really. And again, we never want, we are anti-fear here. We're not fear-based communicators, but we are big on awareness. So could you shed a bit of light on that side of things for us?
Sure. And I guess, what I think it can be a really difficult balance in the menopause conversation. And I do see this kind of polarization happening at times. And I think it comes from your concern. So, we don't want women to be frightened, but we want them to be aware. So how do you present, kind of these messages in such a way that you achieve both of those things. And I guess what I will say is that, the research shows that most women, as they move further into postmenopause, will experience a significant reduction in their symptoms. And they will actually find that internal anchor again. They've rebuilt that sense of self and identity and that confidence in self. Which, funnily enough, we tend to develop self-belief when we overcome hard things. We don't develop, I don't want to get too much into resilience because it's quite a broad topic, but when we know that we've gone through and overcome whatever that means for us as individuals, a really difficult time, that actually builds our belief in our capacity to cope and in our capacity to get through tough things. And so for me, that's kind of what I think is one of the perks when we move into postmenopause, is that it's a tough time, this, this struggle and growth process. And when we manage to find that sense of steadiness and sustain it for a period of time, that's actually like, oh yeah, okay, cool. I got through that really tough thing. Interestingly, I think we've usually got through a fair few tough things or before we even hit perimenopause. And I think that's often what carries us through, maybe by the skin of our teeth, but nonetheless, it gets us through. So, in kind of responding to that, you don't want fear-based messaging. I do want to put it out there that that is the experience of most postmenopausal women. The flip side of it, though, or the entry point, is perimenopause, and it is very confusing, and many women have symptoms that are really quite debilitating. I don't know if you've heard of Dr. Linda Deer. She's a New Zealand doctor who is referred to as the Meno doctor, and she does a lot of stuff in this space, which is super cool. She did a survey on New Zealand women, I think it was in 2022, but in last year she did it on Australian women. It was about 5,000 women who responded to the survey. And, it's kind of the most up-to-date data that we have. And I guess, some of the stats that I think are really important from that is that about 85% of women will experience symptoms related to the menopausal transition. And about 63% of those will describe them as moderate to severe. So that's a large portion of women. Sometimes the stats have been more than that. Sometimes they've been less, but that was, last year's survey. And I think, one of the stats that's quite startling that also came out of her survey was that 23% of women said life wasn't worth living. Which is really heartbreaking. And we've known for a long time that the rates of suicide amongst women are highest in the midlife age range. And I think, I have to admit, I do think those stats are changing, because I think we're finding that teenage girls might be overtaking that as an age range, which is neither are great at all. But in terms of midlife, I think we've only somewhat recently made the connection. Well, if this is a really vulnerable time in terms of mental health, it, funnily enough, it occurs at the same time as the menopausal transition, and we seem to have only more recently made that connection. What I certainly have seen, and look, I'm super guilty of it. There's plenty of women that actually specifically come to my mind, let alone just this sense of women that I've worked with where I wasn't informed, perimenopause informed, and they're coming for help for their mental health, and it just wouldn't have occurred to me. Certainly not. If they were in their early 40s and under, it wouldn't have occurred to me for a period of time to be having this kind of conversation. And I also know that most GPs still aren't having this conversation, and psychs still aren't either. It's one of the really big things I'm trying to achieve within my own profession, and I have done a reasonable amount of professional development since in this space, because we may well be the first port of call for a woman. Yes, she might have come on a mental health care plan, which means she would have seen a doctor, but the doctor either themselves may not know to consider menopause as playing a role in depression, anxiety, or a reemergence of trauma symptoms. Or if they do, I guess they may not necessarily, well, they may know, but they're in a 10-minute consultation with that patient, or half an hour, even 20-minute, half an hour consultation for a mental health care plan. And it just doesn't give them the opportunity to get to the depth. There's plenty of times where we, in fact, more often than not, what we see on the mental health care plan as what they've told the doctor is the issue. And it's not that it's not, but there's a heck of a lot more that they just haven't had time to share or haven't felt comfortable enough to share. We spend a lot more time with our clients and more frequently, so we get a depth of that understanding. So it's really important. I think it's important for all health professionals, but particularly your GPs and your psychologists to know about this stuff. But yeah, mental health, if we have had mental health challenges before, particularly during those other hormonal periods of time, then we have a vulnerability. And again, that's not at all to alarm women. It's to have them recognize, as if they are moving into this stage of life and they feel like their mental health is declining, it's to help them understand that what's happening for them isn't unusual, and it may well be it's likely to be linked to their hormonal shifts, particularly if that's how it showed up at different other times where a lot of hormonal stuff was going on. And then they can get help much, much quicker, because that's what we want. We want them to be supported as quickly as possible. It's when mental health issues aren't recognised and supported, in a speedy, appropriate and speedy way, where mental health declines. So certainly I would be encouraging women just to be aware, if they've got a mental health history, to know that it could be, this is a vulnerable time and things could flare up again. What often happens, though, is that it can be the first time. So they've not had mental health issues before, or not to a degree. Plenty of women will tell me, my anxiety's through the roof, and I'll say, is this something familiar to you? Oh, I had, yes, I've had anxiety before, but I never needed help. I could always kind of keep it in check. So they wouldn't previously have said that they had a mental health issue historically. That's not how they define it, even though they're saying that anxiety has played a little bit of a role in their life. And so just like mental health issues can show up for the first time during pregnancy and postpartum, same kind of thing can happen here. And my curiosity lies in whether women who experience first-time presentations of mental health issues in perimenopause and menopause, whether that is more common for women who haven't had children, who haven't had pregnancy, that they haven't been aware of that risk, because that might be, obviously puberty is a risky time in terms of the hormones and things, but if you haven't had children, then you haven't had that hormonal upheaval before, so you may not be, I guess, aware of your own vulnerability as you enter perimenopause, because it kind of hasn't been tested, so to speak. It's not quite the right word. Yeah.
That is huge. I before we jumped on with you, Kirstin, Anita and I were talking about this. That's my story. So I have I have a history of anxiety, and it's particularly around post birth. Postpartum. I'm like, what's the word? And now moving into midlife, I've recently experienced quite a lot of trauma, and I'm noticing those same symptoms coming back, and it has knocked the breath out of me, and I'm like, oh, not again. And I think that's, I really appreciate Anita pointing out that we are like so not about fear mongering around here. And yet I would so much prefer to know what is happening is not, a you problem. It's a thing that happens. It's, it's not out of
Mm,
the range of not quote unquote normal. And so
mm,
it's sort of like, I think sometimes we want to hide reality a little bit because we don't want to get scared, but then it's like, how can we use that information to empower us? And so I think the question that I want to ask you, as
mm,
someone who literally can kind of see this rolling in real time, and I'm like, oh, really, do we have to do this? um I guess what I want to ask is, like, at what point do you, as a psychologist working with women, how
mm,
would you sort of frame this for women to, like, when do you get worried? Like, when should we as women be like, I think this is bigger than I can hold, or I think this is more than a little bit of anxiety that I've often been able to manage? Because I
mm,
really, I work as a counselor, and so
mm,
I kind of, I guess you know that sometimes the most unexpected people are struggling with the desire to
mm,
not be in the world anymore. And
mm,
so I
mm,
would hate to think that we just don't know the right questions to ask as people trying to navigate this for ourselves. So when do we
mm,
know, oh, I might need some help here because this is bigger than I can hold and I'm not okay?
mm. Yeah, and I think I mean that's a really good question, and in some ways, I think the answer would be a little bit different if women weren't in midlife. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
And the reason is because if it's showing up during your perimenopausal years, then the etiology of it, the cause of it, is likely to be different. It's likely to be hormonal. And does that necessarily make it any harder to deal with? No, but it would usually mean you also have a whole other, there's other stuff going on as well, other symptoms and things that you're grappling with, which just makes it even more difficult. But I think the interesting thing is a lot of women know, but they don't act on it. And so you kind of, I think something that you said just then was, if I'm thinking this is bigger than me, when would I, when would I go and seek help? Well, I think it's when you're thinking that it's bigger than you.
Yes.
And I mean, certainly when you're in that thick of a really tough day, everything looks super bleak. But if you have some other days that are where you're feeling, actually, no, I'm on top of things. If that was happening outside of perimenopause, um, I wouldn't discourage people from getting any help at all. But if you're definitely having more good days than bad, then perhaps it's about sharing with friends and looking for the supports that are in your day to day life. And, taking some action to look after yourself better. As a minimum, as I said, I wouldn't discourage someone getting help by any means, but it may not be alarm bells. But the thing with perimenopausal or menopausal depression and anxiety is that it kind of tracks the hormonal fluctuations, which means it's unpredictable, which makes it difficult to manage. But it also means that it can be punctuated by good days. And this is where the misdiagnosis or non diagnosis can actually come into play. Because if we were to look at major depressive disorder, for example, for a diagnosis of that, there's three big differences between major depressive disorder and what we would call menopausal depression, apart from the time of life. So the time that is occurring in life. So major depressive disorder in women does tend to show up more with the lethargy and the teariness and those kinds of factors. So its expression looks different. Menopausal depression tends to have, it's quite similar to postpartum depression, which is irritability, anger, short fuse, that kind of thing. So it's not that there's no tears, it's just that it has this layer of irritability that's not so common for women's depression at other times, non-hormonal times in their life. So that's one of the things. The second thing is that major depressive disorder, you tend to have to be presenting and experiencing a set number of symptoms consistently. So you're going to feel teary and lethargic, and that you're a failure and life's not worth living, and all of, sleep is changed and not good, appetite's changed, not good, all of these different things for a sustained period of time. Menopausal depression, on the other hand, can be punctuated by these good days. And that's what can be quite deceiving, because if you're sitting in front of a GP in a 10-minute consultation, for example, and you've gone there because I just don't know what's going on with me, there's these times where I feel really low, really pissed off, I'm biting people's heads off and all the rest. And, a GP who's appropriately trained in kind of screening for depression will be asking, oh, so tell me more about that. And tell me about a good day. How often might you have a good day? Do you have any good days to begin with? And as soon as you kind of start talking about having good days in amongst these bad days, you're kind of moving away from a typical diagnosis of major depressive disorder. And if the GP or the psychologist is not aware of that, then they're just starting to exclude depression as an idea. And so, as I said, the expression of it and the frequency or infrequency of those typical kind of menopausal depression symptoms, and then the stage of life as well. Those are three variables that are quite important and can lead to a non-diagnosis, as in you are depressed, but it doesn't look like it should. So therefore, it's the stress of life. You're a midlife woman, you've got a million demands on you and all that kind of thing. Or because it fluctuates as well, and this is where, Professor Jayashri Kulkarni's done so much research at her centre in Monash. People can start going down the thinking of a bipolar disorder because of, that I feel good, I feel in the depths of despair and stuff. And I believe, and I hope, I don't think I'm misquoting her because I've listened to a lot of her podcasts. She has talked about the frustration because medication for those kinds of mental health issues are really full-on medications to be prescribing. And at times I believe she gets a bit frustrated that that's what's prescribed, and yet hormones may well make the biggest impact because that's likely to be the cause of that kind of presentation. I mean, it is a bit more sophisticated than that. And, I wouldn't want people to be going off and kind of diagnosing themselves. But what I do want them to take away is that if there is a stop-start to, if there's, a number of bad days and then some good days and fine days and all the rest, that is not necessarily something to be ignored. It's not an indication that you're A-okay. It would be ideal for you to be going and speaking to someone, particularly if it's in this stage of, late 30s onwards, to go and talk to a menopause GP, informed GP, or for those who may be not seeking a mental health care plan, because not everyone does get a mental health care plan, to see a psychologist, to be going and seeking support from a psychologist who knows about this stuff. And as I said, I know plenty of menopause-informed GPs who are really trying to educate their own profession, and I certainly am doing my bit too in mine.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yes, absolutely. I think the thing that I want to point out from that, just briefly, is the duality, I guess, of normalizing this and also going, you don't have to live with the disruption of that without support. Because I think sometimes when we normalize something, it makes people kind of go, oh, well, I just have to buckle in and get through, right? And it's like it can be normal and still supportable, right? And I always really like to point that out, even though I think you made that very clear. I just want to kind of put some highlighter over that, because I think it's really important to be able to say, okay, this is not outside the realm of what people experience in midlife, but I also don't have to white knuckle my way through this. I can get support, which I think would lead us really nicely, Anita, into asking, how do we, you said menopause informed GPs and things, but tell us, I know this is what, what you are doing now with All About Her. So maybe it's a beautiful segue to talk about that. But I think, because, I've got a wonderful GP, but I know when I've raised the question of perimenopause, I had an ultrasound, and apparently I have a lot of eggs left, so it can't be that. And I'm like, I don't know if that's how this works. But anyway, I just wonder if you can give us some insight into how to be our own advocates, to find the right people, to find the right support. And if I've jumped in too soon with that question and you've got something else you want to say, or Anita, you've got a different question you want to ask, feel free. But I just want to make sure we get to that as well.
Sure. I guess the only thing I wanted to say in reference to you kind of pointing out that it's normal, but you don't have to white knuckle it, that is a really, really important message, because menopause itself has had that as its problem. That has been the narrative is, if you live long enough, you will go through menopause, but hey, you just got to suck it up. So it's really important that we undo the second part of that narrative. There's a lot of things that are quite normal during this transitional stage of our lives, but we don't have to suffer through it. That's not to say that there's miracle cures for everyone, or miracle interventions that will solve everything. People have very varied responses to the range of treatment pathways that are available to them. But there's certainly a lot that you can try that will most likely be of help and worthwhile, and therefore worthwhile. So yes, that's a very important narrative for us to change, even in the broad kind of menopause conversation. But going to advocating for yourself, I think there's some really cool things I think that women can do. So the first one would be to educate themselves, and the Australasian Menopause Society has a lot of fact sheets on there. If you're finding you may need to convince your GP, then I would probably be downloading and kindly presenting some of those fact sheets to them. We also have those fact sheets on the All About Her Centre website as well, and they are all evidence-based fact sheets. We spent a lot of time making sure that it's kind of, when you're an art for a regulated professional, you have to be really careful what you put out in the world. And so our fact sheets were really heavily scrutinised, and they're available to people as well. I guess maybe this is doing myself a bit of a disservice, but I think the AMS fact sheets would probably hold a bit more weight with a skeptical GP than a fact sheet from All About Her Centre, sadly, but we might get there in the end. So that's the first thing. I think the other thing is you'd be wanting to book a long consult. And if that is not available, if you can only book a long consult and you rock up and you say why you want the long consult and talk about the possibility of perimenopause, and you kind of get a response of, that wasn't really necessary, and you don't feel as though you get the opportunity to really talk fully about what is going on for you with a GP who really demonstrates that they want to understand what it's like to be you, then I would probably move on from that practitioner. I know a lot of the menopause-informed GPs actually have an even longer consult than the long consult, because I think most doctors have a long consult that might be, half an hour-ish, whereas if you find the menopause-informed GPs, a lot of them will have at least 50-minute consult. That's just their norm. And then they'll have regular reviews and things like that. I guess, again, this is my understanding that, you can't diagnose perimenopause through blood tests. So it doesn't mean that your doctor may not ask for blood tests, because they want to rule out other things, and they want to make sure that there's not other things going on that could explain your symptoms and or be, aggravating them. They don't have to be mutually exclusive, but it's about, if you're sent for a blood test, well, let's send you for a blood test to see if you're perimenopausal. That would probably be a bit of a alarm bells for me. If I heard you're too young, that would be alarm bells for me. If I heard reference And my sister actually saw a GP who referenced the Women's Health Initiative study, which is like a gazillion years old, many decades
Ancient
old,
history, yep.
and has been debunked. Her GP referenced that study last year when she said she wouldn't prescribe MHT. And I very promptly told my sister to find herself another GP. Which she did, and she's been really well supported. So I think what we're going to see is a lot more clinics set up. Like there's a couple here in Perth that are just menopause informed GPs, so that yes, they will work with women. I mean, obviously they need their full health history. Not that they don't talk about other stuff, but you don't go there if you've got a cold or all those other kinds of bits and pieces. They specialize in the menopausal transition, PMDD, as well as some of endo, PCOS, and some of those other kinds of things that women can be experiencing. And I think we're going to see more of them pop up because it is a specialist area within the general practice area. And I think it's only a really good thing for women to have that.
Yeah. And then
so
from
those
there,
would be kind of, sorry.
No, you keep going. You're right.
I was just going to say, those would be the fact sheets, because I think that's a way for women to educate themselves, and then, they can pass that information on to their GP. If their GP is receptive, that's awesome. GPs can't be expected to know everything. And so if you have a really good relationship with your GP, but they don't seem informed, but they're happy to learn, then, go for it. And hopefully they can muddle through that, I guess, prescription process of MHT, because I do feel, in my experience and the feedback that I get, is it's a bit of an art as well.
It is an art.
For some women, it's your first go works kind of thing, and then for most others there's tweaking and all sorts of stuff to go on, which is also quite reliant on symptom tracking. And I'm terrible at symptom tracking. I'll just put it out there. I'm also an ADHDer, so that goes without saying. It was difficult as well because I had a hysterectomy. I kept my ovaries, but I had a hysterectomy, so I didn't have a cycle. I didn't have a period to be able to track. If I had, I might have been a bit more able and prepared to kind of symptom track. But certainly symptom tracking is really, really important as well. And, you've got the AMS who's got, the list of accepted symptoms. Again, we've got a symptom checklist on the All About Her Centre website. Louise Newson has her Balance app. There's a free version which you can definitely track your symptoms on. And then if you want to pay, you get, more stuff. But you don't need to pay in order to be able to use and access the symptom tracker. And what I liked about that particular app is that you could kind of add some symptoms, not from the perspective of them being outlandish. They're still kind of relevant in this particular space. But yeah, it just enabled you, because not everyone has hot flushes and night sweats, and in fact they often can come later in the process of perimenopause. Usually the first symptoms are more your brain fog and your mood. They're usually the first signs, which can often be confused with burnout, or burnout is also present, as well as these symptoms which are indicative of perimenopause. But I think symptom tracking is really helpful for doctors as well.
We need to know what we're working on.
So I would suggest that for sure.
Well, thank you. That's been beyond awesome. There's so much there. Furiously taking notes. I know Erica has, and we will replay this and make some more notes. But thank you so much, Kirstin. It's just been an absolute pleasure. And the other thing that I would like to add is that if women are listening to this and want to reach out for professional psychological conversation, can they contact you wherever they are? Is that possible?
Yeah, so they can certainly make a booking with me online on the All About Her Centre website. We've got some other psychs and some other therapists. We've got a naturopath and nutritionist as well. I'm certainly really interested in having more health providers and health practitioners who are deeply interested in the menopause space join. Because I guess that's the other part of All About Her is, yes, it was born out of absolutely the frustration of I want to be able to refer people to other health disciplines for support. When I did my market research and spoke to some health providers, they very much wanted a community of other health providers. They wanted to be part of a community. They wanted to be part of something where they could access professional development, which is something that we provide in the practitioner membership. And they wanted to be, because a lot of them are sitting, solo practitioners, they wanted support to be able to work with the clients that they really loved, which are midlife and menopausal women. So as a health professional member of All About Her, those are the three key things that we provide. PD, referrals of their ideal client, which is midlife women needing that specific support from that health discipline, as well as this kind of community for health professionals where we can build genuine relationships with each other. They all operate independently. They don't work for me in any shape or form. Independence and autonomy was something that they all wanted, me too. And so I wanted to build that into the offering for the health practitioners. But so it really serves this, kind of dual purpose. It's really about how can I support midlife women through this stage with the feedback that they've given me about what they need and want, and whether that's as a consumer of services or whether that's as a provider of services. There's enormous overlap in that, and that's what floats my boat, is to be able to be some kind of conduit for that. So yeah,
congratulations. I think that's
Thank you.
extraordinary. Yeah, it's a great offering that you have there, and I'm sure it will change thousands of lives and professional people as well. So congratulations.
Thank
it's
you.
a wonderful thing.
Thank
it's really,
you.
really good.
Thank you.
Erica,
Been
is there
an
anything
absolute pleasure.
Oh, yeah.
No, I just want to say thank you, Kirstin. This has been really fabulous. I am, as I said at the beginning, very grateful that you said yes. So thank you very much. I really hope this won't be the last conversation that we have. It would be great to have you back, because I think that, talking about mental health is my favorite subject too. So, just thank you for shedding so much light. Thank you for, your work in the world. I just think, like Anita said, it's going to change so many lives, and I know I'll be making use of that as a resource myself. So thank you so much. Have we said where to go? Have we given the URL? Do you want to give us the URL, Kirstin? I'll make sure I pop it all in the show notes.
It'll all be in the show notes. But let's speak.
Say it out loud.
Sure. So it is allabouthercentre.com.au. I'm on LinkedIn under my own name, because I certainly notice far more conversation on LinkedIn amongst professionals, which is really super cool. And I also have two Instagram accounts. One is the All About Her Centre, and then one is the Midlife Psychologist, and that's got kind of underscores between each word. There's many places that you can find me.
Thank goodness.
Awesome.
Thank goodness there are many places we can find you. Yay.
Thank you.
We'll find you in all of them,
Thanks for having me. Thanks for having me.
Thank you
really
so much.
Love these opportunities. So thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's go change some lives.
Let's do it.
Sounds good.
Thanks. Bye, Kirstin. See you, Erica.
Thank you for joining us for Midlife Unfiltered. If you loved this episode, you're going to love what's coming next. Be sure you're subscribed on your platform of choice so you don't miss a thing.
We'd also be delighted, and for sure do a little happy dance, if you took the time to leave us a rating and review. Those not only absolutely make our day, but more importantly, it helps other women who may be wanting something more from their midlife to know about us and to listen in as well. You can connect with us on socials too. You'll find links to connect on LinkedIn, Instagram, and email in the show notes.